You know, global politics isn't just about wars. It's about relationships, trust, and how countries show up for each other when it really matters. And right now, things are getting a little uncomfortable for the United States. President Donald Trump is facing a situation where tensions aren't just rising with rivals, but also with longtime allies. So, the big question is, what exactly is going on? Let's break it down. And let's start with the bigger picture. There's an ongoing conflict involving the U.S. and Iran, and it's already having real-world consequences. One of the biggest impacts? Energy prices. Gas prices in the U.S. have crossed $4 a gallon again, something people haven't seen in quite some time. At the same time, global oil prices are also climbing. Now, a big reason behind this is the situation around the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most important oil routes in the world. A huge percentage of global oil passes through this narrow stretch of water. So, when there's instability there, even the possibility of disruption, it sends shockwaves to the entire global economy. What's interesting, though, is Trump's stance on this situation. On one hand, he's been talking about negotiations with Iran and even suggesting that a deal might be on the table. But at the same time, reports say he's also open to ending the military campaign, even if the situation in the Strait of Hormuz isn't fully resolved. So naturally, this creates a bit of confusion. Is the U.S. pushing forward or pulling back? Right now, the messaging feels a little mixed. Now here's where things take a more serious turn. This isn't just about the U.S. and Iran anymore. It's about how America's allies are reacting. Some of the closest partners the U.S. has, countries in Europe, are starting to push back. Italy reportedly denied landing access to a U.S. military aircraft. France refused to allow certain U.S. military flights to pass through its airspace. Spain even went a step further and closed its airspace to U.S. operations related to the conflict. That's not a small thing. These are NATO allies, countries that are supposed to be on the same side, especially during major conflicts. And when they start saying no like this, it sends a strong signal. Trump, as you can imagine, didn't take this lightly. He publicly criticized countries like France and even the United Kingdom. At one point, he suggested that these countries should rely less on the U.S. and handle things on their own. He even made comments along the lines of, "If you need oil, go and secure it yourself." Now, that kind of language is pretty unusual when you're talking about long-standing allies. It's direct, it's blunt, and honestly, it shows frustration. This brings us to a bigger issue. NATO, for decades, NATO has been one of the strongest military alliances in the world. The basic idea is simple. Countries support each other, especially in times of conflict. But now, that unity is starting to look a little shaky. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently said that the U.S. might need to rethink its relationship with NATO after this conflict. And his reasoning is pretty straightforward. If the U.S. is expected to defend its allies when they are in trouble, but those same allies don't support the U.S. when it needs them, then is that relationship really balanced? It's a tough question, and not an easy one to answer, because alliances aren't just about agreements on paper. They're about trust. And once that trust starts to crack, even slightly, it can lead to bigger problems down the line. At the same time, tensions aren't limited to Europe. Things are also getting complicated between the U.S. and Canada. Now, historically, the U.S. and Canada have had one of the closest relationships in the world, economically, politically, and militarily. But recently, that relationship has started to shift. The Trump administration has taken a tougher stance on trade and security. There are now warnings that certain vehicles coming from Canada, especially those linked to Chinese technology, could face restrictions at the U.S. border. The concern here is mostly about data and security. Modern cars collect a lot of information, and if that technology comes from countries like China, it raises questions about where that data could end up. Because of this, the U.S. is becoming more cautious. But from Canada's side, things look a bit different. Canada has been trying to diversify its partnerships, building stronger ties with Europe, Asia, and other regions. They're also making moves to strengthen their own defense capabilities, especially in areas like the Arctic. So, what you're seeing here is a gradual shift. Instead of relying heavily on the U.S., Canada is exploring more independent options. And naturally, that creates tension. If you zoom out and look at everything together, a bigger pattern starts to emerge. This isn't just about one war. It's not just about oil prices. And it's not just about disagreements between leaders. This is about a shift in global relationships. Countries that once moved closer together are now starting to act more independently. In some cases, they're even starting to compete with each other. And that changes the entire dynamic of international politics. Now, let me share my take on this. Honestly, this feels like one of those moments where things could go in very different directions. On one side, this could just be temporary tension. Disagreements happen, especially during complex global situations like this. But on the other side, it could be something bigger. When allies start refusing cooperation, when public criticism replaces private discussions, and when countries begin to rethink long-standing partnerships. It usually means there's a deeper shift happening beneath the surface, and that's something worth paying attention to. Because strong alliances aren't just built on power. They're built on cooperation, communication, and mutual respect. And if any of those things start to weaken, the whole system can feel the impact. So yeah, that's where things stand right now. Rising oil prices, tensions with allies, questions around NATO, and a changing relationship with Canada. All of this points to one simple idea. The global landscape is evolving. The big question is, where does it go from here? Is this just a temporary phase of tension? Or are we looking at a long-term shift in how countries work together? That's something only time will tell. What do you think? Do you think this is just politics as usual? Or is something bigger changing in the world order? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.